Welcome to the Censinet Champion webinar series. I'm Ed Gaudet, the host. I'm the CEO and founder of Censinet, and today I am joined by Terry Grogan, the VP and Chief Information Security Officer at Tower Health. Welcome, Terry.
Hey, thanks, Ed. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. I know we did a trial run here of prep, and I'm just so excited to share all the amazing things you're doing, obviously with your TPRM program and leveraging not only your process but our product, so the technology. So obviously, our listeners are going to be really interested to hear a lot about your program. So let's just get started. So we've got a couple of things we're going to cover today in the agenda. Terry will take us through what it was like managing TPRM before Censinet, um, the evaluation process she went through to select a tool, why they chose Censinet, and the overall impact on their TPRM program that Censinet is having. In addition to all the changes I'm sure you made on the process side as well, and any broader organizational impact you're getting from the tool and from working with Censinet. So let's move on to first slide. So yeah, I remember well again. We actually worked on a couple of opportunities together. So you were at Bay State at one point, and I know
Yeah.
we worked with you when you were there as well. So maybe just take us through your journey and to Tower, and then what it was like when you got there from a TPRM perspective.
Okay, sure. Thanks. And yes, we did actually first meet at Bay State, which is when I became very attracted to your product. At that point, I have worked in healthcare IT since the late '90s, and came to Tower about 2 years ago, 2 years in June, and walked into what was very normal in many institutions, a risk management program, third party risk management program that was um, minimal and very manual. We were the dreaded spreadsheet. And while I've seen a lot of spreadsheets used in different organizations, this one probably was the most complex one I think I'd ever seen. This spreadsheet had 9 tabs on it,
Wow.
and each tab had dozens of questions. All I could say is vendors really wanted our money to fill out this tab. And just looking at and getting the vendors to answer these, getting them back, it took forever. It took some vendors just looked at us and said, "You must be out of your mind." But we convinced them otherwise, and they eventually would complete them or leave them partially complete. And then we would spend weeks trying to digest the answers in there and then still wind up having meetings with vendors because we didn't understand. You could tell question answer fatigue from the vendors as the tabs went on. So
Right.
the questions got more cryptic and less accurate. So it was just really, really, really slow. Supply chain was not involved. And they would often say, "Oh, by the way, we bought this product. Did you ever look at it?" And so there was just a huge disconnect in workflow. And there was no such thing as reassessment. There was never, a vendor never was reassessed. So whatever they did, whether it was 5 years ago or 6 years ago or 2 years ago, they never had a reassessment. So it was just a very immature process and
Right.
very time consuming.
Right. And not uncommon, obviously, from many organizations that have been dealing with the process around security risk assessments. The state of the art for a long time was the spreadsheet, the dreaded spreadsheet, and a combination of emails and phone calls and some file store, maybe your email as a file store, or maybe you were sophisticated and you started using SharePoint at some point, right? But really no way to manage and get leverage out of the process. And can you talk about sort of the team and how the team felt about that process?
So yeah, it was tough. We had about five people who worked on assessments. And so if you, and often the assessment was many months before we actually bought the product or implemented it.
Hmm.
So now it's coming time to implement, and everybody's asking the same questions again, and sometimes the exact same ones from the vendor because nobody can remember what was done. There's no data to look up. Like, does this vendor do SSO? I don't know. Let's find the person. Well, the person who did that part of the assessment's off. We have to
Hmm.
go find his email. And we did start moving them to SharePoint. So we did get a little bit better there, but you still had to go search and dig. And it was just a lot of disjointed work by a lot of different folks on these assessments.
Yeah. And so let's talk about where you ended up. You obviously began to look at a couple of different options for tools. So take us through that experience.
We did. So I knew I could not continue to go down the spreadsheet path. The fact that I couldn't do reassessment and the fact that I had no way of knowing what did my landscape look like, what was my vendor risk in total, I had no data. So I needed a product. And so I, of course, remembered Censinet from Bay State. So I included them in a short list of vendors I looked at. So I looked at three vendors and we looked for criteria that said the product has to be flexible. I have to be able to change what I ask a vendor based on what I'm buying. How risky is it to my organization? Will it have a lot of PHI, little? Will it face the internet? Is it enterprise wide, department wide? Can I make, can I create a questionnaire that allows me to repeat that all the time to the same vendor, to different vendors in the same vendor, so that staff get used to looking for certain kinds of questions. And ideally, I was looking for something where the questions would be leading questions. So depending on how a vendor asked it, we'd ask different questions. And so those were some of my criteria. I needed to be able to collect data so that I could then look at it at the end of the day. And of course, Tower, like a lot of healthcare institutions,
Mm.
was still digging out of COVID and everything else that happened. So this was, I needed something that we could afford. Nobody disagreed with my needing this, but it had to be affordable. So
Hmm.
those are my criteria as I looked at I had three vendors on my list, and those are my criteria.
And how important were things like workflow and collaboration within the tooling? Did you look at that as well?
So workflow needed to be easy. It needed to be something where it was important that I could allow supply chain or risk management to be involved and look at this, and not just my security team. I needed to be able to allow others to provide input on the infrastructure side or on the risk side or on the supply chain side. So I was looking for that collaboration. Uh, not to not to cut to the chase here, but one of the so Censinet checked all of those boxes, and then the icing on the cake with Censinet is the collaboration at the vendor side. And what I mean by that is nobody else I looked at had a commonality where a vendor had the option of answering the question once for one client and then just validating that there's no change to those questions or making some minor changes, maybe answering a very few custom questions, but actually shooting you your answers right away, not having to re-answer the same thing over and over and over again. That was such a unique capability on Sensinet.
Hmm.
And so that you already checked all the other boxes, and that really was the icing on the cake for us. The fact that you're so healthcare focused. And so, therefore, all of us use the same core vendors for the most part.
Hmm.
There aren't very many of us that are going out buying from somebody nobody else ever heard of. And even if we are, then good, hooray for them because they now get in the system, and that's going to help with other healthcare systems looking for them.
Right. Right. Excellent. Excellent. And obviously, that's an important set of criteria when you have to go back and reevaluate those and reassess those vendors as well over time. Uh,
Absolutely.
Can you talk about the I know oftentimes when you're buying a product, obviously you want to look at the capabilities within the context of your needs and requirements, but how important was the vendor as an organization? And did you feel like you got a sense before you bought that this was someone you could partner with?
So, that's a loaded question, Ed, because of course the answer is yes when it comes to Censinet. So I'd already had positive interactions with Censinet at Bay State when I was there,
Mm-hmm.
and was really impressed with how well the staff listened to the concerns of the risk folks on how the product did or didn't work, or what they were struggling with, or changes they were looking for. And then for me in particular, I needed, because where Tower was, I was brought in partially because Tower was in the turnaround mode and moving
Mm-hmm.
out. I needed a vendor that was willing to partner with me and make sure that you could help me make this product affordable and flexible for what I needed for right now, with an option of growing later. And that was immediately 100%. And from day one, it has been that way. And so partnership is a bigger criteria for me than anything else. And I look for it in all the vendors I interact with, and Censinet is absolutely up there.
That's great. All right, let's go to the why sense in that slide. I think you've covered some of this already, but you want to take us through this?
So the pieces that were key for me, partnership was biggie, and you made it so that you understood what I needed to do right now as a very immature organization on where on third party risk. So I couldn't consume every single thing you could do right
Hmm.
away. So
Right.
how do you make this work for me and allow me to grow? And so you partnered with me on that. The sell in around the fact that the vendor community, a lot of our vendors already are familiar with Censinet. They've done the assessments. I mean, it took, and I know we're going to get to a different slide, but the difference it made in efficiency for both the vendor and for me has been amazing.
Hmm.
Most important to me is the ability to actually look at my whole environment and what's my risk look like. So I now have the ability of saying, well, how many of my vendors use standards different than mine to gain access into things? And I was able to actually look at that data and say, hey, we need to lean in on these three or four key vendors. They're large, they're enterprise, and they're not following our access standards.
Hmm.
But that does something different to my risk. How do I change that? And of course, you let me see who's in the cloud, whether that's known cloud standards like AWS, or is it self hosted? And that's a
Hmm.
different risk. And the breach notifications are also a value in there. So they're right there.
Hmm.
Since I've been a Censinet customer, the product innovation and the changes have been amazing. I I was shocked, and I think I told you this when I had you present the product to us here
Hmm.
as we were looking at and assessing products, just how different you had changed in just the 2 years since I had seen you from Bay State. So the project continues to grow by leaps and bounds in a very positive direction. And that has been a great win for me.
Well, that's great. Yeah, and obviously you and other customers are part of that, helping us really the catalyst for that change, driving the requirements and giving us, quite frankly, excellent ideas about where to take the product and where to create more value for you and others. So thank you for that. I wanted to just kind of go back on one area here. When you talk about the reporting, um, uh, are you beginning to look at you know, you talked about the risk concentration reports, which is good and useful. Are you beginning to think about, how you communicate at the executive level now based on the data you get.
So yes, as a matter of fact, I used the reports in here and the dashboard I was able to create from the risk register,
Hmm.
especially because we also participated in the benchmark marking that Censinet co-sponsored. I was able to show my board in very clear data where we were for gaps compared to others, the residual risk we had, and specifically in what area. And it allowed me to advocate for the purchase of a security tool I needed to hit a major gap. And that was because of the data I have in this dashboard. It also has helped me advocate with leadership why we need to change some of our early on contractual arrangements with some of our new vendors, especially around, for us, the integration with Active Directory and single sign-on.
Mm.
It showed the risk we have by not doing that, and how many vendors aren't doing that, even
Hmm.
though many of them are capable of it. So I got that all in the dashboard that I have.
Yeah, that's terrific, and we'll talk a little bit more about the benchmarking, but obviously the main need was third party risk management, but the other areas that we provide, like for enterprise risk management, have also been helpful for you and the team. That's terrific. All right, so let's look at obviously the results, the impact from Sensinet. Um, if you can you take us through that.
So I think
And by the
one
way,
of the
this is my
things
favorite
that,
slide,
yeah,
by the way.
yeah, one of the things that's really um, I can't say enough about is time to value.
Hmm.
And I know we didn't talk a lot about this earlier, but some of the other projects that the other two projects I was looking at, I've implemented both of those, which is why they were included in the survey at other organizations. Um, both of them had a long time from purchase to actually using because of complex configurations and custom setups and builds and workflows and getting it out the door. I was live and using Censinet in less than 2 months after I purchased it with real vendors. I was using it on, and I mean, real new vendors. I was using it on legacy vendors through proxy assessments within the first 4 weeks. I had my workflow out well enough established in less than 2 months. And the implementation time, the time to value was amazing.
That's
Amazing.
great. No, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, it's we oftentimes will see organizations get started within the first 2 weeks
Yeah.
of purchase. So that's really great to call that out.
Yeah. And I
And
mean, that comes from us going from manual and disjointed workflows to actually agreeing on a process that we could all work. And that
mhm.
included bringing supply chain involved, getting an entire process that went from cradle to grave on a new vendor and bringing a new vendor in and assessing it and understanding residual risk, approvals, work needed to be done if there were um, findings that needed to be. I mean, we just had the whole process done in less. I mean, that was just an amazing amount of time. The time for
Mm.
that. Uh, we've gone now. Our assessments, what used to take us a couple of months to do, 6 weeks or so to do, they're less than a week on average because that workflow was so quickly figured out and completed. Plus, vendors often complete an assessment. Some vendors are turning around my request for assessment the same day.
Mm. That's
Most of
great.
them are, even a brand new vendor who hasn't used Censinet before is taking less than a week to do their part of it.
Mm.
They find it easy enough on their end, but then the questions are straightforward. Plus, they're leading, so they're not answering a lot of questions that have no value in the assessment they're doing.
Hmm.
So I now, instead of having 5 different people working on this, there's only 2 of us that work on this. And neither one of us has it as a, I do not have a person that has this as their own job. This is a part-time job for 2 security folks. And we bring in as necessary tech folks to look at maybe a particular infrastructure piece if it's a complex. But because vendors now include data flow diagrams, that's one of the questions, and they're right there and everybody can see them, which, by the way, also helps when we have downtime. People now go to Censinet and log in to pull up diagrams. So there's just a lot of value to having third-party risk in one place you can look. Uh, I'm now doing reassessments. So I now have vendors reassessed and they're based on risk as to how often they're reassessed. It is just supply chain. They're right in it. They just immediately go into Censinet, request an assessment for a new vendor, and let us go through and then know that they can move forward. We are first in that line before this goes anywhere else to be reviewed because I can use some of the findings in here to help drive language in the contract.
I love that, and I love that you were able to take some of the resources too, and I assume redeploy them in other areas that were
Absolutely.
that were required that maybe you were trying to hire for but couldn't hire the right people or whatever. You want to talk a little bit about that, where you ended up redeploying folks, or?
So I never had full-time people that were doing these assessments.
Hmm.
So I was always pulling people out of their day jobs to work on these things, which is why they drug on so long. They were so disjointed, it took so much time. So now I rarely need to bring in those folks to,
Okay.
or anything. And if I am, it's very specific. It might be because we're doing a brand new network architecture we've never done before or something.
Mm,
Uh, so it's not to assess risk. So I was allowed to, what it's allowed me to do is get people back on other projects that were dragging because they kept
mm.
getting annoyed by all the work they were being dragged into for vendor assessments.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Anything else you want to call out on this slide before we move to the next one?
No, and again, the biggest thing, one of the biggest changes I've been able to drive is reducing that risk from vendors who we weren't implementing with single sign-on and integration. I
Hmm.
mean, user management is such a huge issue for healthcare,
Yeah.
period. It is one of our biggest risk areas. And to not have an integration where I'm centrally managing IDs is crazy. And it's been nice that I can quickly see what vendors are and aren't meeting our needs. I
Hmm.
can get language in the contracts ahead of time for vendors who say, well, it's on our roadmap. Or in a number of cases already, the vendor says, well, yeah, we have that, but it's an extra $1,000 or something. And it's
Hmm.
like, okay, supply chain that needs to be bought and needs to be added because that has to be part of this. So having supply chain and legal involved in this flow, which we did not have before, has
Hmm.
been a big improvement in my managing risk overall for the organization, not just even third part, not just the vendors risk themselves, but how we use the product and the
I,
products we buy.
yeah, that's a great point. Thanks for calling that out. All right, let's talk about some of the broader value that you've been able to pick up through some of the other components.
So yeah, and I just I will point out this is illustrative, for example, and this is not my assessment, but we did indeed participate in both benchmarking studies. The first one was good for me. I'd only been in the organization about a year when we did the first one. So it gave me the opportunity of really taking a good look at the organization, both with Hiccup and NIST. And I hadn't taken the time to do that before. So I was able to bring multiple team members in to complete this because I was driven by getting this data. And the data off the first one is actually data I was able to use as part of my speaking to the board to show where we stand compared to others,
Hmm.
the biggest gap I had, why I had it, and what I could do to help close that gap, which then I could confirm because we got better on the second year's benchmark, and in particular in the area where I had my gap. So I now have that data to speak to the board with to show where the improvement was from. So it's been valuable to have this information.
And were there any other uses? Oftentimes I'll hear that customers will leverage this data for their insurance premium pack or maybe their bond rating. Um,
So yes, so uh, we I was able to provide this information to our cyber insurance vendor rather than filling out 200 questions that they asked me to fill out for insurance. So that was nice. They still made me fill out about 50 of them, but I it did cut my time pretty significantly by being able to give them the fact that I participated in this benchmark and show them the answers to those questions in those areas there. So yes,
uh,
that did indeed help me.
Excellent, excellent. No, that's really great. I'm really I'm glad you were able to take advantage of the benchmarking study because as you know, we offer it as as part of the things we do for the industry at no cost. We think it's the right thing to do to provide this level of access and information and insight so that organizations can really begin to implement the right controls and the right processes to reduce risk. So we're trying to do our part as well. So I'm glad you were able to participate. So we're going to go to some questions. We had some questions here come in. So Terry, question is, any implementation tips for managing change to process and people as you bring in a tool like Censinet?
So for me, I involved my risk and my supply chain folks, as well as legal, in the demos. Once I
Mm,
knew I was going with Censinet, I brought them in into the demos, and then we talked about, well, how would this help you? What could we do here? And had the Censinet folks who were presenting talk about. I knew some great folks that do these demos
mhm.
and talk about how it would work or how that could help that area. And so that I got them engaged in implementation right up front. And it made implementing really quick, especially because we kept saying, well, let's start it this way. And if that doesn't work, it's easy enough to change. It's easy enough to improve on. And that has been the case for us.
Yeah, that's great. Um, this one isn't directly related, but I'll ask you anyway if you're comfortable answering. Great. Lessons learned from Change Healthcare.
Oh my goodness gracious. So it's interesting. One of the things I asked Censinet, so we didn't talk about the fact that Censinet listens to their customers. And so I am, as Ed, it's whether Ed likes me for being this way or not, I'm assuming he does. I am constantly saying, hey, what about this? Hey, what about that? And you have made multiple changes to the system just at my request. I know that other customers ask for it, but I feel like it's in my request, like the email, using your email. But with
Yes.
the change thing, I've asked, and I believe your product team is working on it, for you guys to give us a way of being able to identify a sole source or a key source, a sole
Hmm.
provider. That has been my biggest lesson learned. We were not aware of, and I couldn't tell you today, though, well, I take that back. We are working on that right now. I couldn't tell you which all of my third party risk folks, vendors are that are really my key source, my sole provider.
Yes.
But where else do I have a single point of failure? So I
Hmm.
know, Ed, I raised that up, and I think you guys are already looking at
You
some
did,
sort
and
of
we are
button
on
or
it.
something.
And you did, and we
Yes.
are on it, Terry. Absolutely. It's a great feature request. So this question is about the recent HHS cybersecurity performance goals that were released at the end of the year, and now there's obviously some grant money that's out there. There's a rulemaking process that's happening, and I think there's some incentives and penalties now that are being spelled out. So thoughts on the HHS CPGs and how are you going to implement to ensure compliance?
So that's interesting. And of course, all we need is yet another set of tools. Although I'm hopeful and looking at it more like the guidance we got from Hiccup. And I'm actually going to guess, Ed, that you folks are already looking at that as well and looking for potentially ways of helping us crosswalk some of those features with what already we're looking at with benchmarking with both Hiccup and NIST to help us with some of that. So,
It's already in the product, Terry.
and that's what I figured.
It's already available.
So,
Mm,
I am hoping that they're not asking us to do stuff that's so way off base from everything we
no,
should be frankly looking at and doing now. And so far, what
absolutely.
I'm seeing, it's not.
Yeah, no. I think it's a good list, the essential, and then obviously there's the enhanced that it will come into effect later. But the essential, I mean, if you're not doing the essential now, you should be doing
Correct.
the essential.
Yes.
Um, so all right, great. Any last comments or insight you want to provide to folks before we end? This has been terrific. Thank you so much for sharing your experience.
Well, thank you, Ed. And I would say that if you don't have a third party risk management tool, tools work. I mean, tools are never the silver bullet, but tools that are insightful really allow you to move forward faster and give you a broader view of your data. Um, so I would suggest looking at them. And this is a great one if you're in healthcare. And I would also say I will talk to anybody that would like to talk to me about this um, and our journey. So
Uh, I really appreciate that. So if anyone needs a referral or a reference, Terry's available.
yeah,
All right. Well, thanks again for your time,
thank
and
you, Ed.
thanks for everything you do. And obviously, you've been a great partner. We appreciate you, Terry.
Thanks, Ed. Have a good day.
Thank you. You
Bye
too.
bye.